Well, thank you for selecting me for the interview for the archives. It was great to read back. It had been a long time that the interview took place, and you did a wonderful job in grabbing the interesting parts of it. So I much appreciate that. Two things before I do this here. I was the milkman from age 11 to age 16. And actually my dad was also the milkman, and he didn't even have bottles. People would come with cans to him, and he had these big galvanized containers, and they would just ladle it into the containers that the people brought to his cart. So, you know, it's like that was the world before bottles and plastic and stuff like that. And then the other thing that I quickly want to put out here is people talking about ecological packaging, sustainable packaging. I've always stayed away from bagged compost materials, potting soils, for instance, that I'm developing right now. And if anyone has a lead on zero waste bags for compost that you will hold up, have integrity, get back to me on this here. I'm shopping for it. So getting to my little spiel out here, and let me make this here full screen. I'm not going to say too much about this here because this here was covered already in the talks. I'm going to talk a little bit about you know, it's like what has changed and where are we going. And you know, when I started composting, it was pointed out is, you know, really looking at what are these resources that are out there. In the beginning, I was doing agricultural byproducts, including some fish waste. Like we had a sea urchin company that did sustainable harvesting, and I would take all the sea urchin shells and incorporate that in the compost, which made musical compost because the little spines broke into little pieces, and when they bang against each other, they made music. It was absolutely adorable. At that time, I reached out to the county many times and said, hey, I could really use the yard debris that goes into the landfill for my composting industry. And I got always the same answer back. That is not feasible. It was just like a headache to them. You could not do that. In 1989, AB 939 passed, and guess what? Suddenly, yard debris composting became not only feasible, but a necessity in order to reach their goals. My vision remained the same. It was like, this is still material that is a resource and not a waste to be managed to create better soils and get a positive plant response. In 2016, SB 1383 passed to reduce emissions. But to me, that was like not enough if you look at it just to reduce emissions from the landfill. Yes, that is great, but you got to take it all the way through. And so I looked at this as a three-panel approach. Is that first of all, what we try to do by maximizing organics diversion is minimize emissions from the landfill. Then you create a compost facility. What we did in the 80s, setting up these windrow compost facilities, that was the technology that was available at that point. Is it great technology? No, we still get emissions from the compost. There are zones of anaerobic composting in there that give off methane. Every time you turn it, there's a lot of emissions coming off the compost pile. We can do better than that. So look at if we can design compost facilities that use less diesel but go all solar, and cover the piles with organic matter that acts as a biofilter so that you reduce the emissions by about 85%. And then you use the end product not only to enhance the soil, conserve water, and et cetera, what was mentioned earlier, but actually to sequester carbon in the soil so that we can actually play a very active role in mitigating climate change. So part of SB 1383 was procurement. And I always had a big problem with procurement because I mentioned to Calvert Sykes, said, why the hell would I need the government to procure compost if I sell all the compost that I make and I can't even make enough to serve my customers? Why does it have to go through this other channel? And I never could convince them to make an escape clause in there where the municipalities could sign off to a composter the responsibility to make sure that 100% of the organics would be sold to the market. So we're stuck with procurement. And so what I've introduced in Sonoma County, we have a carbon sequestration working group. and we got together, it's like discuss things, what we can do, but we never really came to action items. And I said, I really don't have time to meet without action items. What about if we put procurement in light of carbon sequestration? And then it makes more sense for the government to be involved in it so that they can manage that, and I'll play a big role in it and do education, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're looking at right now in Sonoma County is, I believe that the agency is responsible for about 55% of the materials that will be diverted out of Sonoma County that they would have to procure. Well, if we could dedicate that all to carbon sequestration and monitor that and actually measure how much we sequestered, we could show what a great contribution we can have in mitigating climate change. Backyard gardens were important to us. We really focused on market diversion. There hasn't been, it's like if you have been doing this since the mid-'80s, we've had many recessions. We've had the fire seasons, the paranoia about fires, biomass reduction, et cetera, et cetera. We've had diseases coming in, many, many different problems. But with a diverse market, your company will always survive because it will just adjust from one market to another. One thing that I never get is when you go, for instance, to Southern California, any big municipality, they never look at the municipality itself as a market. And to me, if you have a city, take Los Angeles, and they say, well, we want to ship all our compost to the Central Valley for the farmers. Yes, it's easy. You can sell compost by the thousands of yards, but that organic matter came to a large extent, except for the food scraps, out of the city. You have a lot of green in the city and a lot of emissions produced in the city. You need to sequester that carbon in the city. And we need to educate these municipalities that, yes, there is a market, because they say there's not enough market for it. There is, but they have to look in the urban areas for the market. And yes, you sell smaller amounts, 10, 15, 20 cubic yards per lot or something like that. But there's a huge market out there. Competitors, I never look at people around me as competitors. I've always been a very open book. I believe that all competitors around me have been at my side. Recology, Republic, Waste Management, our local composters, they have all come to my side and participated in workshops that I've given out there. I talk about marketing as an open book. I talk about composting process as an open book. To me, if you can match my standard, be my guest. I think we get a better industry when we do that, and a more secure industry. So I'm here to basically help the industry as a whole grow. The MRELO, the model water efficient landscape ordinance, has been widely underused in the landscape industry. It prescribes that mulches and compost have to be used in new landscapes and redesigned landscapes. The Healthy Soils program is a great market for compost and mulches. Carbon sequestration is help open the market up, and there is really no need for competition. We can all sell everything that we make out there. I stayed out of specialty blends. That's what a lot of my competitors went into, and say, yeah, you can have that. It's like I stay on the big bulk sales, and you can make these specialty blends and make that your niche in the county. And then, it's like, and I emphasize, like, make what the customer wants. It doesn't matter what you think is a good product. You need to make something that the customer really wants to buy that material from you. So how will we promote zero waste? Organics is a huge fraction of the waste stream. And so by diverting organics from the landfill, we actually participate to a large extent in how we get to zero waste. I include in that that there has to be waste reduction, even in organics. I do a lot of talks about that. People need to do right size planting. It's amazing how many people plant these big shrubs right next to the front door that will hide the front door after a while. And all the people do is prune to keep the door free. It's like put plants in the size that you want them in the air, so you don't have to do as much pruning. I've worked with the California Organic Recycling Council as a founder, being the chair of it many times. California Compost Coalition was basically working on regulations and legislation affecting the composting industry. And I founded the California Compost Quality Council, which basically set standards for quality compost, which we then turned over to the USA Composting Council, which is now the SDA program for quality control managed by the US Composting Council. U.S. Composting Council. One of my proudest moments as a lobbyist was taking on Dow Chemical when the herbicide clopyralid reared its head in California. 6 attorneys showed up at every meeting. The attorneys had access to the senators directly, and we could meet with staff up in their offices. That was an uphill battle. I once got handed an envelope by the attorneys of Dow Chemical. They encouraged me to open up the envelope. I told them that they didn't want to know what's inside of it and handed it back, and sought to fight through to the end. We got a bill through that said if that herbicide was used in California, then you could not take that plant material to a compost site, and the sales of clopyralid nosedived in California. That was a great win. Dow Chemical, within 3 weeks, got a bill through on the national level that no one could adopt a bill like we had in California. It's amazing how fast they can work. And then I've been a critical voice on compostable plastics. There is a bill being worked on right now in California that actually incorporates everything that I wrote a position paper on in 2008. They pride themselves on how cooperative they are, that they want to work with us. It took them 15 years to address points that I've been talking about before they actually take action right now. I don't call that cooperative. That's like stalling the process in order for this year to move forward. And then I still have a big problem with it. Yes, we may be able to compost this year, but it is still a single-use plastic. And I think it still sends the wrong message if we want to get away from single-use plastics. And that is my presentation. This picture out here, by the way, is a pilot program where we work with UC Berkeley, where they measured emissions coming from windrow composting. And now at some point, we're going to compare that with covered aerated static pile composting and see how much we actually can reduce in emissions from the compost site. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Are we going to save the world with compost?
I don't think we're going to save the world with compost, but I think we can make a great contribution to making a better world. And one of the reasons why I want to really get the urban communities involved is a couplefold. Number one, that's where people are that the most people are that will vote. And if we can increase the awareness on how compost through carbon sequestration can mitigate climate change, then we can vote more politicians in office that actually will take this issue seriously and pass less.
Yeah.
We now see farmers advertise that this produce has been carbon farmed, then we can actually help agriculture move in that direction, because they can select, just as they select for organic, that they can select, I want to have carbon farm produce to save this planet. And so I think these are really important aspects why the public has to be involved in this here and get familiar with composting and what the benefits are.
Well, Will, thank you again. I mean, it's an interesting discussion when you're dealing with how to create a business and make a successful business, and then you get sidetracked with the politics and the regulatory side of it. You probably didn't think in the Netherlands when you were digging in the dirt that you'd have to deal with politicians someday to do what you wanted to do.
Never. I never thought that I would become a lobbyist.
But small businesses all have to do that. So yeah. I'm going to turn this over to questions through each of Will, Stephanie, and Nikki and Neil.